Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a chilling piece of folklore from Puranpur village. And honestly, I absolutely love narratives like this because what starts out as a classic ghost story totally transforms into a deeply human, real-world tragedy. We're going to unpack the whole legend, the characters, the dark history, and some really shocking twists you probably won't see coming. Okay, so to really understand this, we need to start with one central question. What actually happens when modern greed collides with a village's darkest, most deeply buried secret? Because this right here, this is the engine of our entire story. You've got this ancient setting full of old sins, and then you have outsiders rolling in with absolute dollar signs in their eyes. And as we're going to see, that is a recipe for complete disaster. Let's set the scene. Imagine Puranpur. It's this beautiful, simple village full of just regular, grounded people. But right smack in the middle of it sits the Purani Haveli. It's this massive, ancient, and honestly terrifying mansion. The locals are so deeply afraid of it that, according to the lore, even if there was a violent, skull-cracking hailstorm outside, nobody would even step onto the porch for shelter. That intense contrast between a peaceful village and this untouched, rotting structure, it immediately tells us something is very, very wrong. Which brings us to what's actually inside the Haveli. The very few people brave, or maybe foolish enough to get close, report seeing an old woman hiding in the shadows. She has this wild, unkempt white hair, and she constantly mutters the exact same unsettling phrase, "Who has come? Who has come? Who has come?" It's such a creepy hook, right? Like, is she a ghost, is she a spirit, or just someone the world forgot? The villagers have no idea, so they just stay far, far away. While the whole thing really kicks into gear when four rather arrogant city folks show up. We've got Rajiv, his wife Ria, and his two brothers, Raman and Prem. They stroll into town claiming they are the grandsons of the original owners, and they completely brush off the village chief's warnings about the place being haunted. They just write it off as silly, rural superstition. Why? Simple. They just want to sell this massive property and make millions. They're basically the walking definition of modern greed. So the four of them confidently march right into this beautiful but, bat-infested Haveli, already spending that real estate money in their heads. But then they actually run into the old woman in a dark corner, and she drops an absolute bombshell on them. She says, "I am guarding a treasure." She claims she hid it years ago, but, well, she forgot exactly where she buried it. Now, as you can probably guess, just hearing the word treasure completely short-circuits whatever tiny bit of common sense these guys had left. The greed just takes over. And it is wild to see how fast that greed spreads. 101. That is the exact number of locals who show up the very next day. It turns out, the moment people hear about hidden treasure, all that deeply ingrained lifelong fear of the haunted Haveli just completely evaporates. Over 100 villagers team up with Rajiv's crew, and they start tearing this massive property apart, digging up gardens, ripping into walls, just desperately hunting for gold. So let's fast forward to the climax of this whole hunt. After hours of finding absolutely nothing, a villager named Ramu spots a collapsed roof around the back. They clear out all the rubble, and it reveals these hidden stone stairs leading down into this damp, totally pitch black, spiderweb-filled basement, and right there, sitting in the dark, they finally spot it. A heavy, rusted iron trunk. They drag it upstairs, their hearts are pounding, and they are absolutely certain they are all about to become millionaires. But this is where expectation violently collides with reality. Rajiv, his friends, the villagers, they were all expecting unimaginable wealth, right? Chests just overflowing with gold coins and jewels. But the reality? They pry open that rusted lid, and instead, they find the terrifying skeleton of a human baby. It's a massive, sickening gut punch that literally stops everyone dead in their tracks. And at this exact moment, the entire story pivots. The old woman, we actually learn her name is Gauri. She doesn't scream, she doesn't run. Instead, she falls to her knees, clutches that rusted trunk, and starts crying tears of absolute joy, welcoming her treasure back. So suddenly, we shift from a spooky treasure hunt into a really devastating psychological tragedy. The monster haunting the house isn't a demon at all. It's a deeply traumatized, grieving mother. To really understand how this happened, we have to look at Gauri's backstory. Years ago, a young Gauri gave birth to a beautiful daughter, but almost immediately she faced this brutal rejection from her husband and her father-in-law, who were absolutely demanding a male heir. They consulted a dark ritualist, and the family committed an unthinkable act. They sacrificed the baby girl down in that basement, believing it would guarantee a son. When Gari woke up and found her child dead, her immense grief just snapped into a madness-fueled revenge. She took a large knife and she killed her husband, her father-in-law, and the servants who helped them. Driven completely mad by the trauma of it all, Gowrie locked her baby's remains inside that iron trunk. She would sit there whispering, "So sleep, my queen. No one can steal you now. You are my priceless treasure." She stayed down in that basement guarding it for years, until eventually the roof collapsed. It trapped the trunk under the rubble, separated her from her child, and essentially froze her in this state of eternal, wandering grief on the floors above. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to take away from this is the grim social context behind it, because this isn't just a ghost story to tell around a campfire. Gowrie's horror was rooted in very real historical stigmas against female children. It exposes these toxic family dynamics that valued a male bloodline over a living, breathing baby. It highlights the fatal reliance on dark superstitions and the tragic real-world consequences of those extreme societal pressures. Ultimately, the real monster wasn't supernatural, it was patriarchal obsession. So keeping all that in mind, how do you think our modern-day scammers react to this incredibly heartbreaking story? With absolute, sickening callousness. Rajiv is so blinded by his greed and so incredibly angry that he didn't find gold that he literally kicks the rusted trunk containing the child's skeleton. It just proves that their modern greed vastly outweighs any shred of basic humanity. They just declare Gowrie crazy and decide to forcefully throw her out so they can get back to selling the property. But here's the thing, Gowrie isn't just a helpless victim anymore. She's been living there, and she is ready for them. What follows is this incredibly satisfying, almost movie-like trap sequence. Rajiv steps on a carpet and plummets straight into a hidden pit. Rhea tries to run and hide, only to get locked in a room completely swarming with hundreds of rats. And Prem tries to sprint away, but violently wipes out on a hallway floor covered in slick oil. It's just immediate, karma-fueled comeuppance for their sheer greed. Of course, all this screaming finally gets the villagers to intervene, and the police show up. And right here is where we get our final twist. The lie? Well, Rajiv and his crew had been claiming to be the legal grandsons of the original owners, right? But the truth comes out. When the police demand to see the paperwork, they've got absolutely nothing. They eventually confess they're just con artists. They heard about some abandoned mansion and figured they could illegally sell it to foreigners for a massive, easy payday. Naturally, the scammers are promptly arrested and hauled off to jail, which honestly is a highly satisfying moment. Getting rid of them clears the Haveli of all that toxic modern greed and wipes away the whole distraction of the fake treasure hunt. With the con artists gone, the village is finally left in the quiet aftermath to reckon with the actual, undeniable legacy of the Purani Haveli. They have to face the real tragedy of Gowrie and her lost daughter. And the story reaches a deeply respectful resolution from there. The village decides not to just bury the secret again. Instead, they properly and respectfully cremate the innocent child's remains. Gowrie is gently taken to a mental health facility so she can finally get the professional care she should have received decades ago. And rather than just letting the old building rot away, the village decides to reclaim the Haveli for a positive healing purpose. They convert the Haveli into the Gauri Kanya Vidyalaya, a girls' school founded in memory of a mother. It is such a beautiful, poetic ending. Think about it. The exact place where a young girl's life was violently stolen because of societal stigma, it gets transformed into a bright, living sanctuary. A place completely dedicated to educating, protecting, and empowering young girls for generations to come. So, I'm gonna leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. The ghosts of the Purani Haveli might be gone, but how many other treasures have been buried by the desperate desire for a son? It really forces us to look beyond the local folklore and recognize the very real, very present horrors that inspire these kinds of tales. Stories like this aren't just meant to scare us, they are meant to teach us. Thanks so much for exploring this incredible narrative with me today.